Headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Now, first of all, have you written in the Spectator this week about the most disadvantaged group in all of Britain, which is bad news for fans of critical race theory and white privilege. The most disadvantaged people in this country are white working class men. Explain.
Yeah, well, measured by various metrics, they are the most disadvantaged group in the UK. In particular, if you look at participation in higher education, i.e. what percentage of white working class boys go on to university, it's lower than any other demographic apart from Irish traveller and Gypsy Roma, I think. So Black Africans, for instance, participate in higher education at a much higher rate, as do Black Britons. The idea that, white working class men are privileged in any way over other ethnicities is false if you look at what percentage of them at school go on to university.
So the notion that the colour of your skin inherently gives you some kind of privilege, gives you a head start in British society, is quite clearly proven here to be a nonsense.
Yes, and there are other metrics too. I mean, if you look at average earnings, for instance, I believe that women of African Caribbean descent earn on average more than white working class men. And Indians in general, people of Indian heritage, earn more than I think any white demographic on average. So if Britain is an institutionally racist country, which gives advantages to people with white skin, that doesn't seem to be reflected in the number of students admitted to university, the number of people in managerial jobs, average earnings, and so forth. So it's hard to know when people complain about white privilege exactly what they're talking about.
People don't seem to, in this country, confront this truth about white working class males. So as such, they're being ignored, aren't they? Their plight is being ignored.
Yes. One of the reasons that African Caribbean boys, for instance, and boys of Pakistani and Bangladeshi heritage are doing much better at school now and are now more likely to go on to university than white working class boys, is because there have been a number of initiatives to increase their participation in higher education. But there have been very few comparable initiatives to try and increase the participation of white working class boys. They are not only one of the most, if not the most, disadvantaged groups in the UK, but they attract the least sympathy. The context of my article in the Spectator, in this week's Spectator, were the BBC's efforts to try and increase the number of working class employees. The
way of judging that is by asking them what their parents did. What did your dad do? Plumber. You're working class. It's ridiculous, isn't it?
It is ridiculous, yeah. And one of the reasons it's ridiculous is that people who's, given that non-white people are much more likely to go to university, even non-white people from disadvantaged backgrounds compared to white people. If the BBC defines working class as what your parents did at the age of 14, many people from non-white backgrounds are likely to tick that box. So it won't actually benefit white working class applicants. It'll benefit working applicants from BAME backgrounds who tick this box because their parents weren't high earners when they were 14.
I'm glad you brought up the BBC because the BBC is trying very, very hard to be seen as an egalitarian organisation, certainly that promotes the equality of the sexes. Now, they are currently involved in a search for a replacement for the 300 grand a year political editor Laura Kunsberg. They had drawn up an all-female shortlist, which struck me as slightly unfair to men. But we're back in the game, we males, Toby, because they've kicked out the all-female shortlist and they've asked Chris Mason a bloke to be the next political editor, or at least he seems to be the front runner. I mean, this is a Kafkaesque fiasco, typical of the BBC, isn't it?
It is typical of the BBC, Karen, I'm afraid. They are an organisation beset with all kinds of diversity targets and hiring quotas. For some reason, merely hiring the best applicant for the job, the best qualified applicant, is no longer a principle that applies in the BBC. And that, if you're a watcher of the BBC, you may well be aware of that already. They've got their tights in a tangle over appointing a successor to Laura Kuenssberg, and they've got these various diversity quotas in place, which is why they've introduced yet another one to try and encourage working class people to apply. So, for instance, at the moment, 15% of BBC employees are BAME, and they want to increase that to 20%. But none of this would matter if the BBC wasn't being funded by the licence payer. The BBC would be perfectly free to lean into its metropolitan bias. And if it wanted to, in the interest of equity, diversity and inclusion, it could stop employing white people altogether. But in order to have the freedom to do that, not worry about this, it needs to become a wholly commercial entity, no longer dependent on the taxpayer.
Quite. Talking of which, Channel 4, the privatisation of Channel 4, has got the chattering classes up in arms. Of course, I live in Hampstead, and like the people of Islington, we in Hampstead, we're absolutely consumed and obsessed by the idea that Channel 4 may soon be privately owned. Why can't Channel 4 just proceed on the principle that you've just laid out? We're a private company, and the way we make money is we make programmes that people want to watch, and if those programmes are popular, we make a profit. Happy days. Instead, they want the government to save them from the normal slings and arrows of the commercial process. Just make it private. What's the big deal?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, people are up in arms about the proposed sale of Channel 4. And it's described as a public broadcaster. And the implication is that it will no longer produce and broadcast high quality programs, but it's not as if Channel 4 exclusively does that at the moment. I'm a fan of Kirsty Allsopp's, but location doesn't seem to be serving some kind of Reithian public service.
Yeah, and not forgetting Naked Attraction, where nude people stand in tubes to be chosen on the basis of their privates, and of course that great bastion of television quality, the great sex experiment, which is currently going on right now. Last question, why do so many Tory MPs oppose the privatisation of this publicly owned television company? I thought they stood for privatisation. Do they know which party they're in?
Yeah, it's very odd. You wouldn't have thought that Conservatives would be defending the idea that there should be, a state broadcaster or more than one state broadcaster. Why does the state need to be involved in broadcasting? Why does it need to fund a public television service? It does seem like an odd principle for Conservatives to be dying in a ditch over. I guess, Kevin, it just reflects the woke capture of large swathes of the parliamentary Conservative Party, whereby they now spend more time virtue signalling than protecting the interests of their constituents.
And even though they're not aware of it, it's going to be the death of them. Great to talk to you, Toby. Thank you so much for your time.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.